Joining me now, live in the studio, is the Industry Minister, Ed Husic, who had a bit to say about the conflict last week. Ed Husic, thanks for your time.
Morning.
Just a reaction first. We had a pretty massive protest in Sydney yesterday and in other cities, but particularly 15,000 in Sydney for the Palestinian cause. What's your reaction to that turnout and those scenes that we see on television now?
Well, I think a democracy like ours does value the ability of its citizens to be able to speak on matters of concern to them and, in this case, express their concern, as many people have, around innocent Palestinians that are caught up in the terrible situation we're seeing that has been provoked by Hamas as a result of what it did on 7 October. And people want to be able to speak to their own governments to express their concern and have that concern registered and noted, which clearly, with the size of what we saw in terms of public demonstration, is an important signal that is being sent. You
must welcome that sort of peaceful demonstration, yes, as opposed to what was being yelled out at the Opera House the other night.
Absolutely. Look, ours is a country, there is always room for peaceful protest. There's never room for hate speech. I've spoken up on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia for the bulk of my time as a parliamentarian. I feel very strongly that these are acidic, they corrode social cohesion and have to be called out and dealt with. But having said that, there is always a place, as I said, for peaceful protest and for citizens, for our fellow Australians, to be able to say to governments, this is what concerns us, please, can you take note of what we're feeling, how we're thinking?
You've just reminded me, actually, of your previous friendship, or maybe it's a current friendship, with Josh Frydenberg.
Yep.
Have you spoken to him over the last week or two about all this?
No, we have. We spoke a few weeks ago, and we speak from time to time, and we both feel strongly on the issues of tackling anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and I've always welcomed his commitment to that, and he knows my equally commitment on calling these things out.
You might not be seeing eye to eye at the moment, though. I might ask you straight up, do you think Israel have been in breach of international law in terms of the way they've handled this conflict?
Ultimately, that will be for others to determine, because these are specific legal concepts that get worked out in terms of people's contributions, or countries' contributions. But I do feel very strongly, as I have said on the public record this week, that innocent Palestinians are paying a horrible price, an utterly horrible price, for Hamas's barbarism. There is by no doubt a requirement, an understanding, there will be an undertaking by Israel to hold Hamas to account for what happened on 7 October, without question. But again, we've seen 1,000 children lose their lives since that point in time. And as my colleague Anne Ali pointed out, they're not Hamas. And if we lost 1,000 children, that's a couple of primary schools where parents might be grieving or would be grieving as a result of that. Like, that puts it into context for us. So there's got to be a better way to target Hamas.
Well, that sort of collective punishment would indicate a breach of international law, wouldn't it?
Well,
cutting off the food and water, etc.
I've sort of taken the view that cutting power, cutting food, cutting fuel, cutting water, cutting medicine to an entire population, that has significant consequence. Fortunately, we've seen the opening of the entry via Rafah, and that has provided much needed access for humanitarian aid, and we, as a government, are providing $10 million to support that effort, of which a large part is going to the International Red Cross, and this will be really important at this point in time.
I guess we've seen Israeli babies killed, women killed, civilian men, other hostages killed, hostages still held.
Intolerable.
How is Israel supposed to... I totally understand what you're saying, don't get me wrong, but how are they supposed to deal with that other than a ground invasion or airstrikes? What options do they have?
Well, firstly,
when there are underground tunnels, when there are munitions hidden underground, etc., etc.
Firstly, let me make the point, as I have repeatedly, that there should be an unconditional release of those hostages. We saw 2 overnight. They're up to 200. They've got to be released. There's just no question there. In responding to your question, I'm not a military analyst. I appreciate that. But I also appreciate governments have to make definitive decisions about how they conduct exercises actions like this. And as I've said, you've got to be able to clearly, and you've asked me earlier around international law, rules of international law require that innocents be protected. And so there needs to be a focus by the Israeli government in responding to Hamas on that.
Do you have a view on the hospital strike?
I think it was sort of discussed the other day. The view was that this was something that was more likely conducted by Hamas, and the foreign minister also concurred with US positions in relation to this. I think the bigger point is here too that we are now in a situation we'll see more of this. And by that I mean with what you've got a very constrained area, you've got a lot of people in there, and there is a lot of military action occurring. And the concern is that there'll be a lot of people in different parts of Gaza that may be victims of what we're seeing between Israel and Hamas.
Jewish people in Australia, particularly Sydney, a lot of them don't feel very safe at the moment. Do you acknowledge that, and how do you feel about that?
I think both Jewish people and people of Islamic faith as well are deeply concerned about what's going on, are deeply concerned that they should not feel or be the brunt of any violence. As I've said, there is absolutely no room for hate speech, for Islamophobia, for anti-Semitism, and my big concern around hate speech, Andrew, is the way it leads to potential action. We've seen that in times past. That cannot occur. It's why we've made an investment to support Jewish and Islamic schools to help them with their security. But this is an important time for parliamentarians, regardless of their political colour, to recognise the value of social cohesion to our country. We all have a part to play in that, and we all have to be very careful of the words that we use at these times where emotions are very raw.
How widespread are these sympathetic feelings about the Palestinians amongst caucus members? We've seen Anne Ali come out and support you, and Senator Fatima Payman's made similar comments. Do you think it's pretty widespread in the caucus, concerns about the way Palestine's been treated?
I can't answer that conclusively or in any statistical way, if I can put it that way. I think people are concerned all round. They're concerned for Israelis, they're concerned for what they had to endure on 7 October and after that. And there are also people concerned about innocent Palestinian families and people that are caught up in this.
What about in the general?
I think there is a broader view about the impact on people. And I think the bigger moment that we've got is to push for de-escalation and for a much more strategic way, precise way, to target Hamas and hold them to account.
What about the general Labor Party membership? There'd be some strong feeling on the Palestine side there in New South Wales, wouldn't there?
Again, I just see that party members, like the broader community, it's very hard for people to watch to see what's happening, and they'll react first and foremost as people recognising the suffering of others. They recognise that particularly in terms of some of the devastating and horrific scenes we saw on 7 October. And I think they'll feel that too when they see kids and women in Palestinian and Gaza hospitals needing treatment for the wounds that they've sustained as a result of what's happening there.
Why did you suggest the Palestinian flag could also be displayed?
Well, if you go back to what I precisely said, what I precisely pointed to is the fact that there will be people that are Palestinian Australians and others that are supportive of their situation that believe that their lives are lesser than. And I've said they look at things like that and that's how they react. And so my precise words, this is the debate that requires nuance. It's a very difficult one. The situation is very, very tough. And the way in which some people have just picked up what I've said and stretched it out to say something else while completely overlooking, and I'm not saying this is in your case, but completely overlooking what I'm saying, is to understand why people are reacting the way they are, because understanding that can go some way to diffusing or de-escalating tension.
But you're not suggesting the flag go up now, you're just pointing out one flag went up and one didn't.
Yeah, and the way that people felt in response to that. And
you've
again,
had that feedback locally, I imagine.
I've had that feedback, yes, absolutely. People feeling that way and just knowing the way that in large part, many sections of the community, the way that they would react.
Do you think we're looking at another Iraq here with a ground invasion? Something that goes on for years and years?
I've noticed in a lot of the US commentary, particularly if you read someone like Thomas Friedman, who's indicated it's not in the long-term interest of Israel to occupy Gaza. It takes on, it profoundly reshapes the responsibilities Israel would have in that area. And they've pointed to the need, commentators, to de-escalate and think through exactly how this action is being undertaken. So I do take those points on board. They're obviously been expressed in the public square.
I just wanted to ask a couple of quick questions on the US trip of the Prime Minister. AUKUS, there have been some struggles with the Republicans in Congress in terms of getting this thing through. What will the PM be doing about that during this trip, and is the government confident AUKUS can still go ahead?
Oh, absolutely. I think there is a commitment by all three governments to proceed. I think it's really, it's particularly heartening out of the $100 billion or so that has been flagged by the US President. There will be a portion set aside to build the industrial base that is responsible for the manufacture of the submarines. So that's an important signal by them. And clearly there'll be discussions on how to progress that, along with other matters that are relevant to the relationship, not the least of which being the energy transition and how we can work together on that.
And just finally and briefly, critical minerals and the like, we're expecting an announcement there. Where's all that at?
Well, in previous announcements between our Prime Minister and the US President, there'd been a compact that had been set up on critical minerals and clean energy. And we'll be progressing, obviously, some of those discussions about how we can work, knowing that we've got one of the greatest stores of critical minerals on the planet that'll be important for the transition, especially in terms of energy storage. And we're looking at that here in the Australian context as well, but working with US partners on supply chains, the way that firms on either side of the Pacific can work together to increase manufacture of products that are going to be really important in sustaining the transition, and building grid sustainability longer term too is going to be really vital.
Industry Minister Ed Husic, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.